Good morning, everybody. My name again is Francis von Hildebrand. I am from Colombia. I am the director of an NGO, a Colombian NGO, called Gaia Amazonas. I'm going to present a few things today. I'm going to make a very brief presentation on Gaia, just so you know what we do. And then I would like to talk a little bit about indigenous territories in the Colombian Amazon. As you will see, it's a very different context than maybe in other countries. I would like to tell you a little bit about that legal framework, and then as well how indigenous communities and the government have been working together in forestry management and in local governance, and how in this moment right now in Colombia we have signed a peace agreement recently, and how opportunities are opening to build together between indigenous communities and the government the management of the Amazon rainforest. After that, I would like to just go a little bit over this forest management itself, and we will finish with a very short video, a 3-minute video, that explains a little bit about our work on forestry management. But to explain a little bit about Gaia Amazonas, we have to go back to the 70s. In the 70s, when my parents first went to the Amazon, that's my father there, and that's me as a baby. And when my parents first went to the Amazon, they went as anthropologists, and they went to the Amazon to look for a particular ethnic group called the Tanimuca. And when they arrived to the Amazon, they came across a people that were working in rubber extraction, with rubber barons, rubber tapping. And these rubber commerce people would sell them things very expensive and have them always in debt. It was a type of slavery. My father spent, my mother, a long time with them in the communities, talking with them, hearing them, their stories. One day my father asked one of these old men what he was doing there. And this old man said that he was there working to pay for a pedal sewing machine, a sewing machine that you work with your foot. And when my father asked him how long he had been working to pay for the pedal sewing machine, the old man answered 35 years. And that was the moment where he changed, and my mother changed from an anthropologist and an academic to an activist. And that is the moment that we can say that it was the beginning of this alliance of my parents and then after me with indigenous communities to walk together, to dream together, to work together with them and the government. In the 70s, they had no rights, they had no land. 40 years afterwards, they owned 30% of the country, and they are recognized as public authorities and public governments. This has been worked between many people, it's not just Gaia, but we are part of this story. So I would, maybe in this short presentation, I would share a little bit with you on that context and some of the work that we have done. So as such, Gaia, we work in protecting the rainforest together with indigenous communities and protecting cultural diversity by, on the one hand, supporting them to get their territories recognized. It's very important. Without, and a few of our friends have said that, without a clarity on the territory, who it belongs and how it is, that tendency is impossible to move forward. By getting lands recognized. The second one is supporting communities to build their forest management programs. The third point is in working together with the national government and the regional government to have good government endorsement. And of course, the fourth one is accompanying both communities and the government to implement these programs while they get the tools and capacities in place to after go on. These are new programs that are coming all the time. So through these last 30 years, we've managed to secure, to work to get 25 million hectares titled as indigenous territories in Colombia. That's almost 30% of the Colombian territory. And we've supported indigenous communities to organize themselves in 19 indigenous organizations that are recognized as indigenous governments, over 15 million hectares. out of which today 3 million hectares have already forest management programs, and there's 2 million more hectares that we're working for 2018. So this is the indigenous territories, what you see in yellow, and what you see with a little bit of greenish is protected areas. And they cover a good part of the Amazon. I mean, the Colombian Amazon is 48 million hectares. It's 42% of the country. Almost half of the country is rainforest. And out of that, 26 million hectares is recognized as indigenous territories. So that's 53% of the Amazon. If you add national parks as well, which is another 10 million hectares, is almost 70% of the rainforest is managed by indigenous peoples because it's their territory or because they live in these national parks as well. And there's an understanding, there's a relation between national parks and indigenous communities. There are models now that are being worked where national parks and indigenous communities work together for the protection of these territories. So this protection works very well. Actually, here, this graph that you see is deforestation. This is a historical analysis of the deforestation in the Colombian Amazon. What you have in red is the deforestation between 2000 and 2005. This is outside indigenous territories, the protected areas. This is in indigenous territories, and this is in protected areas. So, in red is from 2000 to 2005, in purple or blue, whatever, from 2005 to 2010, and in black from 2010 to 2013, this data here. But as you can very, very, very clearly see, is that indigenous territories and protected areas are very effective ways to prevent deforestation and to protect the Amazon rainforest. Even you can see that deforestation is even lower in indigenous territories than in protected areas themselves. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that, so we're going to look a bit at that. Not just in the Colombian Amazon, but in the Amazon basin as a whole, in the Amazon region, 45% of the Amazon region is indigenous territories or protected areas. And so half of the Amazon is indigenous territories or protected areas. And there, only 4.4% of the entire deforestation in the Amazon happens in that almost 50% where indigenous peoples are. So again, indigenous peoples' lands is a very good way to protect the Amazon rainforest. In the Amazon region, it is clear. This is not a debate anymore. No, it is, we have the clear data on how indigenous territories managed by communities properly can be a very powerful tool for environmental management and community conservation. And in these territories, 50% of the carbon stocks of the Amazon rainforest are also within indigenous territories and protected areas. So, in the case of Colombia, a very important moment was in 1991. In 1991, it was the political constitution in Colombia, that there were new agreements between the government, indigenous peoples, different sectors of society, and there is where indigenous territories got recognized. In the case of Colombia, indigenous territories are of collective property. They belong to all indigenous peoples. They cannot be bought and they cannot be sold, and they cannot be taken away, nor by the government, nor by the state. Not even if the communities, if every single indigenous person in the community agrees, Pacho, me, I'm a very nice guy, they want to sell me a piece of land, they can't. It is protected by constitutional law. They would have to change the constitution in order to change this. So it is collectively owned, cannot be bought, cannot be sold, cannot be taken away. But in Colombia as well, in that moment of the constitution, they thought, well, if you recognize a territory, but you don't recognize, at least to a certain degree, that the people who own that territory can make some decisions, can manage that territory, then what's the point? If you own something but you can't decide on what happens with it, what's the point? So there is where the government recognized that indigenous peoples as well, they could create their associations of indigenous traditional authorities. This is indigenous organizations that have the recognition of the state as political actors that can make decisions on their territory. No, almost like a municipality. So they have political decision making. They can represent the communities with the state. They can dialogue with the state, and they can as well advance their own programs in coordination with the state, not as an autonomous, independent republic, but in coordination with the state. So these are the indigenous territories that we work with in Colombia. It's 19 different indigenous governments that are over 15 million hectares, and where, as I mentioned before, 3 million to 5 million hectares are already in forest management, 3 million hectares already with forest management, 2 more million hectares in the next year or something that will be under management of the communities themselves. I'm going to skip this maybe for the meanwhile. The way that communities are organized is that in each area, communities associate. That's why when we saw before, the name was Association of Traditional Authorities. That's because the communities associate. And they associate however they want. Some indigenous organizations have 5 communities, some have 20 communities. It depends on the alliances that they have. They have different ethnic groups, different relations. Many times they associate by the basin of a particular area. So they associate and they create the different assemblies. And in the assemblies, they have one representative from each community where they debate the decisions that are made. And in order to coordinate with the national government, with the ministries, with different government entities, they have a permanent coordination forum. This is a particular space that happens twice a year, where indigenous organizations and the government, every year in March and in November, this is a space where they go with their plans, with their proposals. The organizations go and sit with the government, and the government has the policies and programs, and they coordinate how this is going to happen. But there are some things that are important, is that these are spaces where you go with clear proposals on how to work. It's not just to go and claim a right, I want this, I want that. It's how do you think, how are you going to do it? How are you going to implement it? So to be a propositive and to come to the negotiation table with a clear plan, and you talk over the plan, you negotiate over the plan. If you talk about rights, it's much easier when you have something in your hand that shows how you plan to implement that than if you talk about it in abstract. So always being prepared and coming with community proposals, concrete plans in hand, has been a very important shift from the reivindicative, or vindicative, I don't know how you say in English, no? Claim, demand of rights, to a proactive and propositive attitude. That's really, really important. So this has been a space where they coordinate for different elements. One, for political representation, for environmental management and forest management, for education, for health. Since 2002, we've had these spaces for coordination between indigenous governments and the national and regional government. 2 spaces, one in the south part of the Amazon, one in the middle part of the Amazon, and as a result, 19 indigenous governments have had a political participation and articulation with the national government, bringing proposals on how they want to manage their primary education. Today, there's over 150 community schools managed by the indigenous governments and with education plans built interculturally, both Western education, but as well with their own traditional knowledge as well. Forest management agreements. They're working on the agreements, the forest management proposals, over 5 million hectares, and over 200 community health posts. So these are results of coming with concrete plans to the table and negotiating with the government. It's a joint construction. It's not a zero-sum game. It's an opportunity to build governance in these territories that are very far and marginalized. And it's important to see each other as an ally and to understand that it's a win-win situation. And for the government, it is better and it is cheaper to work with communities. If you want to manage these territories, it would be very crazy in Colombia if over 26 million hectares to hire forest guards over 26 million hectares. It would be ridiculous. The best way to manage is with communities. They have the knowledge, they live there. They've been calling these parts of the Amazon their home for over 10,000 years now. So, 3 components have been important when talking about good community management of the rainforest. On the one hand, of course, there is, if one wants to have that communities are committed in protecting the rainforest, one is having very clear forest management plans. I will show you a video just now, very short video, 3 minutes, that shows a little bit how we build this, how we support communities to build these plans. But as well, this has to go hand in hand with looking for economic alternatives for communities. In my experience, when there is a bad management of territories by indigenous communities, it's not because they don't have the know-how, it's not because they don't know how to manage it, it's not because they don't want to manage it properly, it's because there are pressures that make them, at the end of the day, use those resources to get money. So when we talk about forest management, we as well have to think about economic alternatives. So it's very important to not to start seeing the different type of work that is engaged in that. As well, if one wants to have a good forest management, it's not just the plan and the economic alternative, it is as well to have a transparent and effective management programs. One has to look at the capacities of the indigenous organizations. Are they properly registered? Is it clear who has decision making and who represents what? Many times the problem is that it's not clear who represents the community, who does and who doesn't. And then the communication with the government is broken. So having organizations properly registered is very important. Having here the indigenous governments with necessary tools and capacities and with strong accountability is very important, because when you manage these programs, you're managing funds, you're implementing funds, you have to report. The government is controlling these reports as well. So about forestry management, it has the environmental component, the economic component, the administrative component. All of these are components that we have to think about when we talk about good forestry management, and eventually coming to good agreements with the other actors, other environmental entities that work in the region. So, no, it's about a joint construction. Just to leave you now, I'm going to put this 3-minute video. As you will see, it's not that I look older in the video, that's my father in the video actually. And this video was done in the context of a meeting that they're talking about maps. So you're going to hear a lot of emphasis on maps. Don't let that distract you. This is about forest management. So I'll leave you with this video, and yeah, let's see if the sound works.
Now, where does this picture come in with S3, which I find interesting? That's with the maps. The main things that are fascinating about a map. One is the map is the way they relate to the environment. How do the hunting? At what time of the year? When can you do hunting? All this get put down in maps. All they put down in drawings. And so it's really become very exciting. I'm talking about hundreds of Indians working on this in a collective way. Because it changes. If you have a map done by men who do hunting, it's different from a map done by women who do the gardening. If you have a map in the wet season, it's different from the map in the dry season. The maps are alive all the time. And you can draw it in the past. How was it? With the myths? How is it nowadays? Why did it change? What were the impacts? And then what is the future you want? And how would you like to see that map? The whole idea for these cultures really, not only to be a power, to survive and to be a power, they need to be able to put the maps and the management planning and the territorial knowledge on maps to be able to communicate with the outside world. And here maps allow them, and not only one map, several maps, one on top of the other. Ecosystems, traditional knowledge, sacred sites, women's gardens, their children where they play, and you start building a whole holistic approach. They come to the government or an environmental management And they have this information, suddenly they start realizing, wait a moment, we have power here. What we're doing here, first, the information that comes from the indigenous people belongs to indigenous people. We would not publish it without their permission. They decide when and how. But what's important there is our real point comes is that how do you share it? You share it, and the way we work there with them, you share it on a political scenario. And now we're going to discuss together the future of the Amazon. Mining has come in the last 3 or 4 years. It's coming in. But the indigenous people, by doing their maps of sacred sites, by doing their maps of the air spaces they use, of putting all their knowledge on these maps, they come to the government and say, look, this is the way we live on territory. Now you want to come into this mining, the Constitution says you can do mining on condition you don't undermine our life system. How are we going to deal with it? The main thing is decision sharing. The main thing is, as they say here in the States, who's driving the bus. You have to negotiate this information. Is power in that sense is a possibility of negotiating of how we can build the Amazon together. It's not kicking everybody out. It's how can we build a sustainable Amazon for the future.
Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.